Welcome back, everyone, to another Sporting Blog podcast. It's the Hat Trick of Women in Football episode today, and I've been trying to get Ali Speechley on for a long time, and I've got her. I finally nailed her down. Mainly my fault for messing around. Ali, how you doing?
I'm very well. Pleased to be on. Thanks for inviting me on. How are you?
Well, I've been better, and I'm just a little caveat to the 4 or 5 million listeners that will probably pick up on this episode that I don't sound my normal angelic self. I've picked up something, you know what it's like. But I'll be all right. I'll survive. So I've got Ali with me today, and one of the things. So we've just to recap the last couple of weeks. We've had Amy from Her Game 2 on. We've had Stump Peg on, and in both of those things, we kind of got into why football and all of this and various things. And I think we're going to try and follow that theme. Because things definitely are improving for women in football, but there's still a lot to do. And anyway, we'll get into all that. But first, let's just do an intro. Ali, why don't you give us the elevator pitch into your life in football, what you do or what you've done and that sort of thing.
Oh gosh, how long have I got then? About 60 seconds.
We can be a very big elevator.
Okay, we're gonna go all the floors.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean cliche really, but I have loved football since I could walk. And however, I was of the generation, or I am of the generation of women who were basically told, this isn't for you. It's a male space. What are you doing playing football? You're going to get your dress dirty, that kind of thing. And I persisted in the school playground in primary school, despite cutting my head open when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I cut my head open playing football. And the dinner lady said to me, this is why girls don't play football. Which I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. And I carried on playing anyway. But when I went to secondary school, I went to an all-girls school and I played hockey and I loved hockey, but there wasn't any football. So I couldn't pursue football at secondary school. And then, so fast forward basically to when I was just turning 30, that was the first time I played what I would describe as organized football. So I played Sunday League for about 3 seasons and I loved it. And I looked around me and I thought, oh gosh, actually, this probably has been here all the time. It's just that I didn't see it, so I didn't know it existed. So I'm very passionate about the old, if she can see it, she can be it, because it's true, because I lived it, or I
Yeah.
didn't live it because I didn't see it. So then what happened was, while I was playing that Sunday League football, I was offered a free place on an FA level 1, as it was back then, to coach football. So I thought, yeah, it's free. Why not? Give it a go. And it was kind of a whirlwind from there, really. I mean, we'll get into the coaching journey, but that's sort of
Sure.
that's my love affair with football, as it were.
So first off, there's no way that 30 was a long time ago. So why it doesn't look like it anyway. You must be doing very well, or eating, your diet must be amazing, or you have some amazing skincare routine.
30 was a decade ago.
Don't
So
know, no.
it's a
Um,
true story.
what did you, so that's a big gap between school and 30, obviously.
Mm.
How did you keep, like, did you play anywhere at all, or did you literally just put it on the shelf?
Yeah, no, I literally just didn't. When I went to university, I thought about maybe it looked like there was an option to play football. And I thought about joining in, but it seemed really intimidating because I'd never been coached and I'd never played in a proper team. I wasn't allowed to play for my primary school team because it was a boys' team and girls weren't allowed to play. As I said, at secondary school there wasn't any provision at that time. And so when I went to university, I felt quite intimidated that I wouldn't be good enough, basically. So I
Yeah.
chickened out and I didn't try. And then in my 20s, as I said, I just didn't, because I hadn't experienced it, I just assumed it wasn't a thing for women. And then so I used to kick the ball about in the summers, with my male work colleagues at the time. We used to go to the park after work and just have a kickabout. And it was while I was doing that, I think I was about 29. These two Canadian women came over, and they'd been playing with some of their friends, and they just said, "Oh, one of my friends has just set up a team in Clapham. Like, you should come and play with us." And again, I was a bit like, what, me? Because I definitely felt by that point like I was about to turn 30, and I thought, no, I'm too old for this. But I wasn't, it turns out. And so, but it genuinely, there was that gap between playing every single lunchtime in primary school to the point where I got kicked out of the school choir because I never turned up for choir practice, because the only time that I was able to play football was at lunchtime, and that's when choir practice was. So I chose football.
It's amazing actually, because so many of the stories we've read in the build up to the Lionesses winning the Euros, and obviously after, have focused on this stage in life. And because I guess at that age it's where everyone's discovering what, not just what they're into, but things become magical, right? It's not just a thing. It's either a real, like it's your thing, or it's not. And I think that's the thing, most people find out quickly what they're not into at that age. But I think if you're into something then, and you go like full into it, then you're probably into it for life. What was it about football, the sport, for you when you were that age? Was it because everyone else was playing, or was it because you just loved kicking a ball?
um I think I just loved to move. I loved being active because I loved all sport, and I loved, and I think it turned into football because that's what was happening in the playground at lunchtime, that wasn't sitting around in a circle. And I think I didn't I had lots of female friends, but I didn't want to stay still. They seemed very still, and I wanted to move at lunchtime. And you were outside, you're in the fresh air, you'd been in a classroom all morning. I wanted to get out and move. And so I guess if the boys had all been playing basketball, I'd probably have had a love affair with basketball. It was just, that was the sport they were playing, so that was the sport I joined in with and fell in love with. But I remember at secondary school being incredibly frustrated. I played netball for the first time, and I was so frustrated by it as a sport, because you can't move with the ball. Like, obviously you can't move your feet as if you have the ball. And I'm sure there's lots of people that love netball, and I'm not dissing it as a sport, but for me, I felt very frustrated by that, and I think that's why I turned to hockey as my sport at secondary school, because football wasn't available. But hockey, you can run with the ball. Basically, I need to run with a ball is what I learned.
Yeah, and I can totally empathize with that. But it's worth saying that you weren't just interested in playing football, because I presume during that decade plus that you didn't play, you were still interested in the professional game, and watching as a fan.
Oh yeah, so this proves my age. The first World Cup that I remember very vividly was Italia 90. And I remember going to my mum making me go to sleep because it was way past my bedtime, and England were playing Cameroon, and we were 2-1 down, and we were on our way out of the World Cup, and I was devastated, and I went to sleep in tears. And I woke up the next morning, and on the radio it was just Gary Lineker, Gary Lineker, Gary Lineker, because he'd scored.
Nothing's changed.
There you go, because he'd scored these 2 penalties against Cameroon that put us through. So yeah, I for my sins, and it's been a painful journey, but I am a Tottenham Hotspur fan. And even though I'm not actually from North London, I'm from Southeast London. But so I fell in love with, Gazza and players like that. Like, those are the players I watched growing up and just thought were amazing. And I used to watch this Italian football show as well on Channel 4 on the weekends. And I used to watch, I'm not that old. We did have a colour TV, But I used to watch it on our second TV, which is a black and white, a little old black and white TV, because on the main TV of a weekend, my siblings, so I've got a twin brother and 3 sisters. So I come from a big family. My mum's half Italian. And so on the main colour TV, everyone was watching, kids TV, like weekend television. But I was desperate to watch any football, as much football as I could. And so I remember just watching this Italian show and just follow it, because it was black and white TV, just following this white ball, just anywhere it went on the screen. I just followed it. I was mesmerized by it.
Well, that was one of the great shows, Football Italia. Shout out to James Richardson, who's still one of the best football presenters out there, who now does Strongman, and I think some other stuff on less popular TV channels, the one we tend to watch. But yeah, it was definitely one of the great shows, and I think that it made household names of people like Gianluca Vialli and Ravanelli and Mancini, and the great AC Milan team of Maldini and co. And that actually, if anyone listening ever played or plays Football Manager, as it was then, Championship Manager, most people from my vintage, which is probably a bit older than Ali's, knew about all of these players in Championship Manager from that TV show. So if you're younger than about 35, you probably would never have heard of this, but go onto YouTube, type Football Italia. It's got an iconic intro, Golazzo, that's where this phrase comes from. It's not Goal Lazio, which everyone thought it was, Goal Lazio. It's Golazzo, which is a wonder goal or a great goal. And anyway, yeah, super show. Sorry, going completely off on a tangent. Wow, that brought back some memories. Yeah, it was such a good show. Gosh, that's brilliant. Okay, so that's cool. So let's kick on then, because what's really remarkable then is if you didn't really start playing until you were 30, then your coaching career, which you've already given away that was a decade ago. Still not quite sure if I'm telling the truth.
Well, as in, so I'm 40 now, so I've spent that decade in between 30 and 40. That's what I spent starting to play and then coaching.
But what you've condensed into that 10-year period is quite impressive, really. I mean, I'm not going to reel off the things, but you're a UEFA B licensed coach, and to get there alone is a lot of work, let alone as a woman in a sport that's not really designed to allow for the progression of women in that arena. Can you just give us the idea of how one progresses in coaching, and where did you start, and where were you looking to end up?
Yeah, it's a funny one, really, because I didn't have a plan with it at all. I wasn't looking to end up anywhere. I said yes to an offer for a free place on a course because it was free, and I thought, oh yeah. And I also thought, because I hadn't been coached up until the point that I joined this women's Sunday League team, I felt that maybe if I learned a little bit about coaching myself, it might help me as a player as well. So I took up this free place, and in fairness to the FA, they have revised all of their coach education over the last few years, and I think it's much improved. But I did the old school, what was called level 1. It's like introduction to coaching or something now, isn't it? But I did the old school level 1, and it was very much about safeguarding and setting the scene, which is obviously really important. I'd argue actually for any age range that you coach, but obviously particularly if you're coaching children. But I didn't feel like it actually gave me anything about football. I felt like it could have been how you safeguard in any sport, to be honest. I just didn't feel like I got any football out of it.
Right.
So I very quickly then decided that I wanted to do the level 2 because it felt a bit more developed. And so that's when I actually started coaching, because in order to do the level 2, you needed a group that you were coaching. They didn't have to be in a league or anything like that, but they had to be a group of players that you saw regularly, in order to complete your portfolio. So I started coaching, as I'm sure all coaches start, unpaid volunteer, 1 hour a week in a primary school playground, no astro, no grass, just a primary school playground. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I think one of the reasons I loved it so much was because I was coaching girls football at a club which is called Shout Out Dalmain Athletic. And at the time, they were the only provider of grassroots football for girls aged 5 to 11 in the whole of Lewisham Borough, which seems insane now. But they were the only club doing it. And I'm from Catford in Lewisham, and I was like, I would have given anything to have a club like that to play at once a week at that age, or any age really. And so I think that's why I loved it so much, because I felt like I was making sure that all the little 7-year-old me's weren't missing out, basically.
So it's interesting you say that. I think a lot of sports start out the same. I remember doing my tennis level 1 coaching exactly the same. It's safeguarding and, you know, that stuff. And you didn't actually learn about coaching a child at all. You almost got the certificate saying, right now you are allowed to begin coaching, right? And then you have to then kick on. So it's very, very similar sounding. But so when, let's say you've gone from 1, you're doing a level 2, which you say means you're kind of getting into the organized world. What point did this flick a little switch and you saying, I can do a bit more than just this as a hobby, or it's not just to help improve my game now, like I'm actually getting a real feel for it? Was that apparent straight away, or was it seeing the kids' development that got you into it, or was it your own development?
I think it was probably a mixture. And I think also at that time, the girls weren't in a league. And that's changed now, and that club does have leagues, and those girls play matches. But I think I felt that that's just what was missing for me at that time. I could coach them football, and we could have a great time once a week after school, but there was no, how do we translate this into a match? Because they weren't playing matches. I didn't take them to matches. So that's when I then baptism of fire, really, because then I went from that type of environment into a completely different environment, which was Millwall Lionesses Girls Academy. And I coached there. I only coached there for a season in the end, but it was a very sharp learning curve in terms of how different environments can be. And it wasn't that it was a bad environment at all. I learned loads while I was there. I learned a lot about who I am as a coach and how I like to coach, and where the gaps were in my sort of technical and tactical understanding of the game. But it was just such a different, they trained 2 nights a week and they had a game on the weekend, and it was just a very different, it was just quite an intense transition from just messing about for an hour in a playground once a week to, right, there's a syllabus, and this is, this is where you need to get these players to, and they've all got kind of their own individual development plans. And so Millwall was next, and then after, gosh, I've done so much in the last like 9. I coached for nearly 9 years. That sometimes it's hard for me to remember. Like,
sure,
I know all the clubs I coached at. It's just to remember the order sometimes. But next was actually Tottenham Hotspur, which was felt like a dream for me, because I've supported Spurs since I was 8 years old. So I coached in their girls' academy, which at the time was still a very developing environment. It was a grassroots setup. It was run by volunteers. Even if you want to talk about the progression of women's football, even if you just look at that one club over the last few years, that's pretty amazing. They properly worked their way up the whole pyramid to get to WSL.
I remember when they were when the ladies team was playing without the sponsor on the shirt. That wasn't that long ago. And this was all, because it wasn't officially part of the kind of, the
Yeah.
the board of directors kind of strategy and all the rest of it. It was kind of like this outside thing that, oh, I suppose we should have something. And finally, the penny dropped. As a Spurs season ticket holder, I have some strong opinions on all these things.
Yeah.
And the penny did finally drop, and it professionalized actually, and now they professionalized very well. Some strange decisions in that side of things as well, but we'll come on to that, I'm sure, another time. So just before we get on to pathways and things, so your own running, how did your coaching experience affect the way you then watched games and attended games? Were you suddenly like quite critical without standing there going, well, they're doing all that wrong? But in your head you must be thinking, that's not how we should be doing things.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's an interesting one as well, because I think I've always had quite an analytical eye. And I studied film at university, film theory. So I didn't study sport at all. I very much was involved in the arts, but I have a trained eye. Over those years, I trained myself to watch footage, essentially, watch films over and over again, and watch clips from films over and over again to look for specific information. And so that actually then translated really well into analysing football, because that's effectively what you're doing when you watch football, especially if you're watching something back to try and understand what went wrong, and indeed what goes right when it works. So I think yeah, it probably did. I think I definitely, once I started coaching, I had a much more critical gaze. But the exact same with when I'm watching film, because people said to me, because I studied film in the end for about nearly 5 years, because I did a master's in it, and I also did a sort of journalism, sort of short course in film journalism as well. And people said to me, oh gosh, how can, like, do you even enjoy the cinema anymore? Like, how do you switch that off? Really easily, actually. Like, I can switch that side of my brain off quite easily and just enjoy the magic of the movies. And it's the same with football. If I don't want to be in that zone and I just want to be a fan, and I just want to get angry like everyone else, or I just want to cheer it like everyone else, then I can do that quite easily. But on the plus side, if I do want to analyze it, I can.
It's interesting because since you've been coaching, really, in my mind, has been the period of time where the kind of over tacticalization of the game has taken something away from it, especially in terms of individual players and expression and all of that stuff. And actually, Tottenham Hotspur is quite an interesting case study in that, because in our woeful teams of the 90s that never really finished any higher than 10th, during that time we had some amazing individual players, including David Ginola, who won the Players' Player of the Year and the Writers' Player of the Year, and we finished 11th. Now that would never happen now. A player would never, ever. But also tactically, under Gerry Francis and others, it was like, I don't know what we were watching, to be honest. It was almost like give the best player the ball, and maybe we would win occasionally. And Jurgen Klinsmann signed, and funnily enough, that's how we did escape relegation a few times. Fast forward to Mourinho and now Conte, like just obsessed with the tactical elements and the formation behind the ball and everything, which is sucking the joy out of watching it. So you must have seen both sides with a coach's eye. We're just getting right off topic, but what do you enjoy watching football as much now as when you first started coaching, let's say 10 years ago?
Well, I mean, Spurs make it hard work at the moment to enjoy watching them, don't they?
No kidding.
I think what's really interesting as well as a coach. So yes, I do still really enjoy watching football, but I think that's because, like I've just said, I could just switch it off if I need to and just get lost in it. But I think what's interesting is how, especially as a youth coach, so I have coached adult teams as well, but I've predominantly coached children. And I coach my starting point is always, where's your strength? So I use a strengths-based approach, because I want my players to feel confident and comfortable in what they're good at first. And then we can start making you uncomfortable and challenging you in a safe way to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but also recognizing the talent and skills and ability that any individual player may possess. And what I find really interesting about Mourinho and Conte is that I feel like they are trying to impose a style of football on a set of personnel who, yes, they are elite players, but Emerson Royal, for example, like, bless him, he's not the best crosser of the ball. So the play is literally going to break down every time he's out wide and you are putting him under pressure to deliver and serve Harry Kane. And I just think, I don't know, maybe I'm just naive, but I'm like, surely you then need to recognize that as this coach who has won pretty much everything there is to win. Like, I just find it, I think modern football is about adaptation, and I find it bizarre that these coaches are just so stubborn. They're like, this is how I want to play.
Yeah.
So this is how we're going to play.
Well, look at Belgium. Belgium, who for the last 5-6 years, and I hate the word on paper, but have certainly got, or had on paper, one of the best set of individual men's team this is players you could imagine. But Martinez, the coach, was so tactically inflexible. 3 of them were on the bench, and you're like, but you know, and this is the same with Spurs. Like, I think sometimes, and I'm very much into the tactics of football. I'm not decrying it at all, but sometimes you've got to think, if you play your best 11 players and maybe work your tactics to fit them rather than the other way around, so that 2 of them on the bench and never play, then we are defeating the object. But then there's the stubbornness between someone who's trying to keep their job or make a point to the board or all these other things that maybe or maybe not Antonio Conte, as an example, is trying to do. But I think that Van Gaal fell guilty of that at United. Mourinho actually, in hindsight, did quite well at United, but was the same.
Yeah.
And I think a succession of Brazil managers have struggled with it too. When Dunga was the manager of Brazil, he was so defensive-minded and formation-focused that these unbelievably incredible players were just standing there like, why am I playing defensive midfield? I'm not getting in the other half.
Yeah.
You know, stuff like that.
And I think that's the big, you know, not to bang on about Spurs too much. All your Arsenal listeners are going to be like, oh, God. But I think that's one of the biggest frustrations of watching Spurs at the moment, is because, you know, there's some pretty good players in that squad. Yeah. You know, you've got arguably the best striker in the world. I mean, I know I'm biased, but, you know, Harry Kane, what can't he do? And we just seem to play this really turgid, dull, defensive, boring football. And I actually think a lot of Spurs fans would happily settle for like 5th. I don't even think they're all like, oh, it has to be Champions League. Like, obviously Champions League nights are great, but not if you're going to play like we did the other week. Like,
well, what's the point? Literally, right? What's the point in it?
So I'd happily settle for lower down the league, but just playing exciting football and playing like you want to play. Because I think this is the problem, is that players get to the point where it's not enjoyable for them. And this is something that I think fans sometimes forget, because yes, it's their job, and yes, they are paid ridiculous sums of money, although they don't control those sums. That's the business. That's not, you know, that's not their fault that that business is insane like that. But they are also just people like you and I who love this game and just want to go and play it and enjoy it, and they want it to be fun. And so I think sometimes when elite players aren't enjoying themselves, I think fans can get a bit like, well, you know, like, you just got to go out and do your job and do it really well, regardless of when you enjoy it or not. And it's like, well, think of yourself in an office or whatever you do in your job. Like, if you're really hating it, are you going to be at your best? Probably not.
No, it's so true. And not just Spurs, but I mean, a Spurs example this year, you know, you can't tell me that people like Richarlison and Perisic have been happy in their work at all, because what they're being asked to do looks not only boring, but it's really difficult. Like if you're not, Richarlison plays as a striker for Brazil and seems to do quite well. Yet asked to play on the right wing, the left wing. Perisic has been a winger all his life. Now he's playing left back, but asked mainly to defend, not as a wing back. So yeah, completely see it. But I like the coaching approach though of looking at people's strength first. And it would be amazing in football if there were more coaches that thought that way. Like, what have I got? I mean, Spurs. We're not going on about it, but Spurs team almost, apart from two of them, I think nearly all of them have got over 50 international caps. If you looked at the very first team, I think apart from Everton, Kulusevski's got about 29, so he's not exact. That's ridiculous. So it's not like they can't play a game, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're all fairly good players. Anyway, let's move away from Spurs because we haven't got the heart, the soul, or the energy anymore. It's been sucked from us, which is stupid considering if they win next weekend, they'll be third in the league. We were going to talk about pathways, but you did actually touch on it a bit. Just you said that it's improved with the FA, especially over the last couple of years. So a pathway for women to get into coaching. Do you think it was designed for women, or do you think they've retrofitted something in to make sure that there's now opportunities available for women?
That's a really good question. I don't think it was designed for women initially, obviously, because quite frankly, what is? But I think what I would say is that the FA, the people who work in FA education, so who are in charge of this, rolling out all these coaching programs, delivering them, but also designing them, that the staff seem to have changed over the last few years. And I think the people now are genuinely invested in making this coaching workforce as diverse as possible, not just women, but people from diverse ethnic backgrounds as well. But they absolutely understand, and I know this because I've spoken to them, that you can't just shoehorn everyone through a process that wasn't designed for them in the first place. And so I think it takes time to adapt, but I think that is what they are doing. So I think their intentions are good. I think what they need to get better at, and again, I can say this very confidently because I've told them this already, is evaluating what is happening, like robustly evaluating whether it's working or not, and where it's working and where it can be improved. Because I think there are lots of programs that are run that have the best of intentions, but no one's really following up with the people that are in the cohorts. It's like, where are you now, and how can we support you in what you're trying to achieve now, and that kind of activity. So I think a lot of progress has been made. Even, for example, when I did my B license, Tony Duggan was on the cover of the folder. Like, I know that sounds really probably insignificant to a lot of people, but that's groundbreaking. Because I've come through coach education history of, I was the only female on my UEFA B license. So there was a cohort of 24, and it was basically 23 men and me. There were 3 tutors, they were all male. But the cohort after me, for example, there were 4 women on that cohort, and one of the tutors was female. So, like I said, progress takes time, but it is happening. But I think even just in terms of course material, they show clips of women's football now, and they get a room full of men to discuss, the England Lionesses, rather than just always looking at the same footage and having the same conversations. So progress is definitely being made.
And in terms of that progress, one of the things I sent you in the notes was, and this wasn't meant to be a dickhead of a question, but what's harder to achieve, women coaching regularly at the local level, or actually higher, not when I say national, I mean international, but you know what I mean, sort of national recognition level? Because I actually would imagine that breaking into coaching at the local club level is really quite hard for women, just because of the kind of clubby nature of it, whereas actually maybe slightly higher up the pathway, slightly more refined, people are going to open doors because they feel like they should do. Do you know what I mean? I'm not trying to be
Yeah,
difficult, but
no, I absolutely understand what you're saying. And I think also slightly higher up, it's almost like you've already earned your stripes and you've proved yourself. Like if you've got a B license or whatever, like it's pretty hard to take the piss, quite frankly, out of any coach, regardless of gender or background or whatever. Like any one of us who has a B license or above in football, you know, it's safe to say they probably know what they're talking about. And um, so I think that's why potentially there's a little bit more respect the higher up. But how do you get there? Because you don't just start with a B license. So to answer your question around the kind of grassroots, you know, community level of football, because that's where everyone starts out. It's not just where players start out, it's where coaches start out as well. So again, I think that is really hard, but the FA is trying to address that. So one of the roles I do, because I've taken a break from coaching. I stopped coaching last year, and but one of the roles I'm doing to kind of keep me in the game, but also as part of my kind, I mean, this sounds really big-headed, and I don't mean it like this at all. And hopefully, people who know me know that I'm not like this, but I think it was actually turning 40. I was like, well, I feel like there's some legacy work to be done. Like, what is my legacy going to be in terms of how can I felt like I helped to provide young girls with opportunities that I never had. But I also want to make the pathway for women who want to be coaches easier than it was for me, because it was tough. It was really tough for me. So a new piece of work that I'm doing with the FA, and lots of people are doing all over the country, is we're called community champions.
Mhm.
And I'm a community champion for the women and girls game. There are also diversity and inclusion community champions that are trying to get more people from more diverse ethnic backgrounds into coaching. But what my role focuses on is trying to get more females into coaching. So it's about going into those grassroots environments, having conversations with the clubs themselves and the existing staff to be like, how do you feel about women coaching here? Just to kind of check the landscape, because I think sometimes lots of people think that they're really well equipped, and yes, they'd love to have a female coach and everything will be fine. And then when you start asking certain questions around the culture and the banter and all the stuff that exists, you're like, well, have you thought that might be offensive to a woman?
Yeah.
You know, so that's the sort of first part of it. But then the main part of it is about identifying women who are on the touchline anyway because they've brought their children to play football, or they're the big sister of someone who's playing football, and encouraging them and equipping them with the confidence, because they've already got the skills, to step over that sideline and then
Right.
coach.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's a piece of work that I'm just about to start now. So you'll have to check back in with me to see how successful it is. But the intention is there.
I'd love to, and but we look forward to that actually. That actually brings us nicely to the next bit. I don't want to keep you all day. I could actually talk about this all day, but just try and.
We've talked about the misery of Spurs for about half an hour, so I'm sure I owe your listeners a bit more time on other stuff.
What have you got from coaching? Sorry, just to point out. So yeah, you said you had a break from coaching. You have also got a life outside of football too. You worked at the Home Office. I think you're still doing that, and you've been a civil servant for a long time. So there's like you're doing an awful lot, which is admirable to say the least. What have you taken from coaching that you bring into your life outside of football, whether it be work, relationships, play, etc.? Is there anything that you kind of learned that you think, yeah, that's been massively useful?
Yeah, I think active listening, because what I learned really quickly as a coach is that I thought I was a good listener, but then I realized that people communicate with you in so many different ways. And so when I say active listening, I don't just mean with your ears. I mean, you know, with your eyes as well, like actually seeing what someone is trying to communicate to you.
Mm-hmm.
But also really listening when people do speak and not just waiting for the noise to stop, which I think we're all guilty of at times, where we kind of just want to say our thing because we feel like it's really interesting or exciting or whatever. And sometimes I think we forget to properly listen to the question being asked, or the comment being made, and properly take it in and process. So that's really helped me in general, in terms of how I communicate with people, just to really understand what they are trying to tell me before I respond.
And that's actually a very good piece of advice. I think especially in a work environment where there's often this take turns element of speaking, right? Your turn, now it's my turn. What I've got to say is probably more important than you say. It's now my turn, and that's like endemic in a lot of office culture. Are you an advocate for coaching outside of sport, as in for humans to be coached by other humans in other aspects of life? Because I don't know if any of our listeners are regular LinkedIn users, but I get an awful lot of people suggesting that they could coach me into various things, and maybe they could. Maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned. What do you think about coaching in life?
I think life coaching is, I'm sure, a really valuable resource, and for people who feel that for whatever reason they're not getting the job they want, or they're not getting what they want by themselves, and that they need some sort of additional kind of support in unlocking, because I'm a big believer in just unlocking what is within someone. All the answers to your questions are already inside of you, but sometimes you need help unlocking them. What I'm a bit dubious of, because with anything that's a commodity, it's like people exploit it. And so I don't like the idea of someone exploiting someone else's vulnerability or whatever to make money out of them, to be like, you need a life coach because your life sucks and I'm going to make it better for this amount of money. But I think, in its essence, if used appropriately, why not? Like, if it's going to help you in some way, I'm all for people kind of doing whatever is going to help them be happier and be the better version of them that they can be.
It's always interested me, because with things like, well, any sport or any vocational activity, really, you get coached how to do it. I mean, you wouldn't just start being a carpenter. You need someone to teach you how to, right? You can't just start. Well, you can just start playing golf, but it's really quite difficult to do it without any lessons. But it's funny, in life, we're often expected to just be able to pick things up, or expect that this sort of knowledge is handed down from parents. I mean, finances is a really good example. I would have benefited massively from being coached in financial planning, or at least some sort of skills when I was younger.
I feel like with life we kind of like learn on the job. Whereas and that can go one of two ways, but I think you're right. Like, there are certain areas of our lives where actually it would have been good to have, just because I think there are certain lessons you have to learn for yourself just by experiencing them, but that doesn't mean that you can't go into them sort of a bit more informed, and you still might make some mistakes as part of that, but at least you went in knowing, eyes wide open. Whereas I think, a lot of the time we don't go in eyes wide open. We're just a bit naive to some things, because unless you've experienced it, you are going to be naive.
That's true. And what about if we flip the picture? So what have you taken from your coaching in sport that you think would, or things that maybe translate well into the workplace, or outside? Because I think that your piece of advice about really listening is something that really works. But what do you think in working life could go back to sport, rather than, is there, because I find, for example, that the organization of companies, especially larger ones, is obviously quite individual, but often it works, and there's a reason why it works. Yet I find playing club sport, whether it's cricket, tennis, football, whatever, that there's often a reshuffle. There's a lot of committees, there's a lot of new people coming in, and it's almost because people haven't quite got it right. Do you think there's a way of improving the way that sports clubs function, particularly at the kind of lower amateur level, or anything like that you could take from your working life?
Oh, that's a juicy question. I think it probably is linked to what I was saying before about like robust evaluation. I feel, and like asking why, because when you coach, you have this whole, in football coaching, the FA has this whole plan, do, review model.
Yeah.
But I think the review bit of it, I'm not sure we always invest as much time in that as we should. And I think I've actually just left the Home Office. I've just retired from my nearly 15-year career in the civil service to work in. I'm going to work for a London sports charity as a community sport manager. So working with strategic partners to ensure that everyone in London has access to community sport, regardless of their socio-economic background. So I'm really excited about that. But in terms of the work that I was doing, we would evaluate it as robustly as possible. Because it's public purse, so any work we do is paid for by you and also by me. And so you need to, is it worth it? Is it working? What are we getting out of it? But also because we're trying to make sure, we're trying to safeguard people. In the work that I was doing, it was about safeguarding people from radicalization. And so it needs to work, because if it doesn't work, that's actually quite dangerous for all of us. And I feel like there's not that much at stake in football in terms of, like, if that person doesn't go on to play in the Premier League, it's not the end of the world. But actually, we do need to safeguard effectively, and we do need to make sure that everything's okay. And I think sport has got a lot better, especially in football, because of all of the historic child sexual abuse that came out. So I think safeguarding is kind of a lot better in football. But I just think in terms of how things are done, I think we can get really, I feel like there's a lot of environments where people do things because that's how it's always been done.
Completely, yeah.
But who's evaluated in the last decade whether it still works now? And indeed, whether it ever worked before, whether it was ever appropriate before, because with some things, arguably not. Just because that's the way someone's always done something doesn't mean it's the right or best way to do it. So I think, probably just evaluating.
It's that kind of adding that layer of, well, whether it's professionalism or checks and balances or whatever you want to call it. And I think that sports clubs in general could do with that. And I think that's why often clubs are so grateful when volunteers come in who've got diverse backgrounds and experiences, who can sort of add that. So yeah, I totally get that. Well, look, it's close to an hour, and we could carry on going because I'm finding it really interesting. But we've got the most important question of all that I didn't put on the notes, but something we ask all of our guests, and then this normally sparks a sort of fierce debate.
Oh gosh,
which
okay.
is
Exciting.
I know. What is your favorite type of dog?
Oh gosh. I mean, I don't know if you'd have invited me on if you knew this, but I'm actually more of a cat person.
More a cat person.
Is that am I off the pod now?
No,
episode will not air.
No, not at all. It's not. It's that, I've found that that people have a view on this, whether they are people or not, because some people have a favorite film or TV dog, or they say, oh, I see this one every day walking, and then some people are like, well, I've got 25 dogs.
So I guess I have to. One of my sisters recently, well, about 5 months ago now, got a puppy, and he is a Springador, like it's like a Labrador and what's a
A Springer Spaniel,
yeah, I think
or
I don't know dogs, so I
let's
don't
quickly.
know what he's a mixture between. He's adorable, so I guess I'd choose that.
Oh yeah, look at the eyes on those. Yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes to a Springador.
He's called Hunter, and he's lovely.
Hunter, name of one of the gladiators from the famous TV show, the ITV, and again in the 90s. Weren't shows much better then, though? They were just, that was...
Yeah, weekend television was better, for sure.
Absolutely, because that was kind of Baywatch, A-Team, Gladiators, that sort of era. All right, Ali, look, thank you so much. It's been really good. So just tell us a bit more about what you're going into now. Can you reveal the name of the charity yet, or is this still under wraps?
Well, it's just because I haven't actually started for them yet. I start at the end of the month. Okay. But if anyone follows me on social media, it will be, once I've started, I will post about it. I don't want to get in trouble before I've actually started,
No, that's fine.
But it's a London-based sports charity, so that's kind of a bit of a giveaway anyway. And I'm really excited about it because I feel like it's the perfect kind of fusion of all these skills that I've built up over the last 14, nearly 15 years in the civil service, but also my passion for using sport for social good, because that's what I always wanted to do with my coaching. Even when I was coaching in elite environments like Chelsea, I still just wanted to help coach young women in particular, but just so that it helped them in life, not just when they were playing football, but it helped them, because I think that helps all of us, and it helps make society better when we have more kind of confident, and because these young women are already capable, and there's this whole debate around women and girls' confidence, and I actually don't think there's an issue with confidence. I don't think there's an issue with the females themselves. I think there's an issue with the systems in which they have to operate in. But that's a rant for another time, maybe if I get invited back on.
No, look, we like rants, and that actually does sound like a very interesting piece for another episode, because I think it's something we said the first time the Her Game 2 girls came on. That's going back almost 2 years, but yes, we were talking about it's the environment in which we exist that puts the kind of the clamps down on things, and it's not always actually that the person is quite capable, but it's what they're allowed to actually do within the environment they exist in, right?
Exactly.
Yes, let's get into that one next time. Okay, Ali, thank you so much for joining us. And where can people find you? Are you wanting people to follow you on social, all that stuff? Are you big into that?
If they want to see my love of Harry Kane and my hatred of Conte ball, then they are more than welcome. I'm on Twitter. It's Coach Ali. So I can't remember. I've got underscores in there somewhere, but if they type in Coach Ali, they should find me. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn.
Okay, we'll put those links in the show notes. But and look, I look forward to seeing you in a few months. Maybe we'll catch up and see how it's all going.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Ollie.
All right, no worries. Thank you.
Bye.